Hello, welcome to Warblog. Not sure whether this is recording. I don't really record on my sort of main computer, so to speak. I'm in an older location as well. But obviously there's a war, and it sort of seems like it's all systems go really. Um, I mean, I went to the beach and I was just lounging around, and I got back and it was saying. I was reading some of the news and they were saying um, such and such a leader condemns Putin's invasion of Ukraine. I was thinking all he did was move his troops into Donbass and Luhansk or whatever. I thought they just keep, not an invasion because he just declared the territories. But the thing is, obviously, I'd missed that since I'd gone out. It was 8 hours after the invasion, and it took me as a surprise. I'm going to be quite honest, quite clear about that. It was a surprise. Yeah, I'm just wondering whether this is recording really. And so I sort of set about sort of setting up some of the scenarios and things. I'm really not too sort of inclined to sort of make them wholly playable at this stage. It sort of took me a bit by surprise, so I'm really just sort of trying to sort of get my head around what's happening. But I think that I finally sort of figured out sort of what's what, and where the focal points are, and what we can expect, and all of that. But the scenarios really aren't designed to sort of say, oh, well, I'm going to play this and simulate this and model this. So what I'm doing at the moment, for example, my first one here, which is just sort of trying to sort of get an idea of what's happening. I'm just using some token units to represent the Russians, some token units to represent the Ukrainians. And I can go back. I've actually gone back and added a little more detail to this than I did when I started. And if I feel inclined later, I can add, but to be honest, I might not. I mean, if things slow down a bit, I might sort of, slow down as well and start adding a little more detail. I have actually just, because I've got a new folder, which is like the Ukraine 2022 folder. And so in there, what I'm trying to do is add things that, for example, I just added these rocket launchers, and now I've been more looking at all the videos and things on Twitter and such, and they're clearly using the Grad rocket launchers. And I'm just trying to sort of think, well, what have they got? What am I seeing? So there's artillery, so I'll have to sort of put in some artillery. Obviously helicopters. It's interesting, really. I don't really want to say too much at this stage because I think we're certainly in a sort of a period of complete disinformation. I mean, we're seeing this and we're seeing that, but I didn't really expect it to happen. I just didn't really think that it would happen. And when I heard that it did, I just really thought that it would just be a case of Putin marching vastly superior forces through Ukraine and really steamrolling over everything. I did sort of, when I heard about it, I did expect that the all air power, they get air superiority straight away. I mean, that's pretty much what they did in the Gulf War. Most of the Iraqi sort of air force fled to other countries. And once they got air superiority, they've got that sort of domination, but they don't even appear to have that, which I think is a major sort of oversight. I mean, I expected things like the man pads. So you've got the man pads, but we're not seeing any sort of real evidence of drones. I would have thought they'd be sort of, just using a hell of a lot of drones and a hell of a lot of these ballistic missile type things and guided missiles and stuff like that. And we're not seeing any of that. And I don't know. I'm just sort of thinking, well, maybe they're just not showing us this or that. Seeing lots of convoys being sort of blown up en route, and that's actually quite shocking. You don't see much of the actual conflict. I think I saw one video of a low-level helicopter carrying out a rocket strike, and then the car goes along, and you see these sort of 3 or 4 lorries carrying tanks all on fire, and that's presumably how it works. So they've got to sort of drive around, and I'm sort of dumbfounded by the fact that they've done it, and it isn't sort of the walk in the park that I maybe expected it to be. And I have actually been thinking, so what would I maybe have expected, and what are the numbers? Well, to start off with, obviously Russia has numerical superiority, but when you're attacking, you need 3-to-1, 4-to-1 odds. And I mean, the Russian doctrine in the Second World War, the Cold War, was like 16-to-1. And so, when you're fighting an enemy that's sort of like defensive, you need that superiority, and the superiority they have is only really just sufficient for good odds. It doesn't sort of mean anything. It's not. It doesn't mean it's going to be a walkover. And they do seem to, the Ukrainians do seem to have a huge amount of firepower at their disposal and organised troops. And when I first saw it, I thought, it's going to be like the Nagorno, where is it? Nagorno-Karabakh war. I mean, this again was sort of mainly just drones, just remotely blowing things up. Any defensive line was fairly sort of irrelevant, and I don't even know who was on which side. But the other side that won clearly just kept sort of blowing up the defensive lines, using remote force, drones and airstrikes. Anything that was armored would be just removed with precision ordnance. And it just seems to me that you might imagine that would happen. The only thing I would say is that it does appear that they are sort of doing possibly something like they did in the Gulf War. They're not stopping at the cities, they're just bypassing them. So, for example, let me just get one of this. Look at the Belarus front. So this place here, which is Chernihiv, I think, they sort of, they came down there. They're saying, they tried to take it, but they didn't. But I think what they're doing is that, if there's any sort of resistance, they're just bypassing the cities. They don't want to get bogged down in that, and so they bypass that, then come up against Kiev, which they're saying that they're trying to take. And I'm not sure that they are trying to take these places, because then it's clear that from all of the experience of the Middle East, that the urban fighting is just going to be bloody. So why get involved? I mean, they're losing units on the roads, and that is shocking. But the thing is, I think on the scale of things, maybe you shouldn't be as shocked. I mean, some of the videos are sort of quite outstanding, really, in the sense that they're sort of it's hard to imagine that those sorts of situations could arise. There was one where there's just some guys hiding behind a white van, and there's a convoy passing through, and they just shoot at one of the trucks as it passes with AK-47s, and it crashes, and they killed a guy, and they killed the driver's dead, and some guy jumps off and they kill him. It just seems to me that driving through a city is a pretty dangerous thing, and I'm not sure that the coalition forces would have quite done it like that. They tend to go sort of block by block. But if you're trying to do things quickly, I guess it's like the in the Gulf War they had the highway to hell, or whatever it was, the sort of fast road straight through to Baghdad. they weren't stopping at anything, and they were getting a lot of firepower on the way in, but there were no sort of images of rows of disabled US coalition vehicles, and we're getting that with the Russian ones. So it's sort of interesting to really sort of compare that. But I think they're just driving straight through. And what we've got down here, this first one, which I sort of redone a couple of times. What's this? That's what I'm looking for. Southern Front. Yeah. So they've sort of obviously come up through here, and this is Kherson. And they sort of drove through it, and they bombed the market there or something, but they apparently just driven straight through, and now they're at the one I'm actually doing at the moment, Mykolaiv, which is just sort of probably over here, and so they seem to be sort of possibly going for distance. I don't know, but I thought I'd do a little video, mainly because I thought I'd just get something out on YouTube that's sort of current and reflects this. But basically, I'm not in the mood or frame of mind to start making playable scenarios, but I have a couple of them are. I mean, they fall in that sort of category. I did the Brodie Assault just because it looked interesting. This is over towards the west, and basically what they're saying is there's some sort of Russian air assault company, and so you start looking at, there was an air base there, there's actually an airstrip there, and then there's Brodie. We don't really know what they're trying to take, and then they attack something, I don't really know what, and then they retreat back to Leviathan, the woodlands of Leviathan. So maybe I should make these woods a little more expansive, etc. So this is more playable, but it's hardly sort of major strategy. And so that's that really. I'm hoping to sort of maybe keep up to speed with certain things. I don't really want to. I've been focusing on it a little bit. The quality is fairly low because I'm putting these out quite quickly, and it's sort of almost deliberate. I don't really want to finish these or get any further into them than they are, but I don't want to do the thumbnails quite yet. So again, we just got the token units, but I mean, you can just see this is just going to be really bloody no matter what, because of all the urban sort of areas, and similarly for Kiev, I mean, this is going to be probably the hardest one, and I'm not sure that they really want to take Kiev. I think that there's all the things on Twitter are saying, oh no, Putin wants to take Kiev, and I don't think he does. I don't know what he wants, because the thing is, I think that I don't really have the qualifications to state what's happening or what I expect to happen, when I was fairly certain that there would be no invasion. I mean, we've got this massive build-up, and I just really thought that it was just Putin really sort of trying to demonstrate that he's serious about these negotiations on whatever sort of front they are. I believe he wanted for the Ukraine to be to scale down its armaments program, etc. I mean, it's probably putting it politely, really. And I didn't think that it would invade, and I didn't think that it would be difficult. So I don't know whether or not they really want to take the cities, or how long it's going to pan out, or even whether it's going badly or it's going well. I think there's a lot of disinformation out there that is being sort of bandied about, and I find it a lot of it is just sort of almost sort of I don't know. It insults the intelligence really when you sort of consider sort of what they're saying, what they're implying, as though there aren't two sides. But whether or not, I mean, I read one report saying this is going to be a long war, and maybe it will. I mean, I would put. This is why I'm saying I'm not really qualified. I would think that it would be over. I would think that what Putin's trying to do is to do something as quick as possible. So he wants to win as quick as possible. I think people accept that. But regardless, he wants to basically knock the Ukraine back into the Stone Age with regards to their military capability by destroying as much of their military infrastructure as possible, on the grounds that it will take them a hell of a long time to sort of build up what they have, and so they won't be back to where they were for a good 10 years or something like that. I mean, if they lose all their radar stations and all their sort of their air force and their all the expensive capability, no matter what, it will take them a long time to build up. But I think that maybe that's what he wants to do. But the whole idea that it might be a very long war is, I don't know. I mean, maybe it will. I really don't know. And I think the scariest thing of all is whether or not other superpowers get involved. In particular, NATO, the US, the UK. I mean, I think anything could happen really. I mean, I keep thinking, well, I was so sure and so certain that it wouldn't happen, and the videos that are coming out are, they're quite alarming really when you consider sort of the scale of things and the seriousness of the situation. I put a map of, I just googled England area compared to Ukraine, and there's a little. The thing that came up for me in Google was a sort of a graphic comparison. And to get from north to south of the Ukraine, it's the equivalent of going from the south coast up to the Scottish borders, up to Newcastle and Northumberland. And to go from east to west, it's like going from London to Wales 3 or 4 times. So people are sort of saying, oh, well, he's only made a little bit of progress. I don't think they're really sort of truly appreciating the scale of the Ukraine, and so it might take a long time. The war might it might be dragged out. I don't know. I think a lot of it comes down to sort of the logistics of it all, and whether or not the Russians can maintain logistic integrity in their sort of supply, just for basic supplies, like things like fuel and food and ammunition and command and control. I think this is sort of something that has been brought up in all of the other situations, in Iraq and Syria. You can only move so far, because then you've got to sort of leave someone behind to sort of, take control of the administration of each little town and location. So they've probably got some sort of system for going in and taking control, administrative control of each location, so that they can, restore order, control order in the interim, so to speak. Because I don't think Putin wants to hold the Ukraine. There's a lot of stuff like, Putin's invaded it because he wants to take the Ukraine. I think he's made his position quite clear. He wants to demilitarize the Ukraine completely. And, to some extent, I think that's probably what his intention is. But, how long he sits there in the Ukraine with his troops is something else. I mean, I think, obviously in a week or a month's time, things are going to look very different. And I wouldn't really want to sort of say, oh, well, we can see how it looks like in a month, because it will look different in a month. But, I think, I just don't know. I just don't know what sort of timescale, they are seriously considering or anticipating this is going to be. When I know everyone is sort of saying, "Oh well, it's got to be quick," and but you just really can't drive anything that far and do anything. I mean, so it's going to take a long time to get from one side of the country to the other. I'd look at some of the others. I haven't done a full map of the Ukraine. Maybe I should do next. But this is the sort of the Donetsk, Luhansk sort of area, the Donbass region. And this is the Maripole, which they've been trying to sort of get to. And I don't think they're really trying in earnest to get through this sort of heavily fortified line, which I've sort of represented with just a bunch of forts and put in some token units. But they've sort of moved through here. Now, I mean, I'm guessing maybe they actually got Ukrainian sort of defensive fortifications along here. I don't think they're that stupid. But it's a bit like the Maginot Line. You sort of think, well, really, what is the situation? Because we're not being told the situation. The nearest that I'm getting, I'm using South Front a little bit, but the nearest I'm getting is this is the Institute for the Study of War, and they've got their assessment. They're having a daily assessment, and with these little takeaway points. Russia has failed to encircle and isolate Kiev with a combination of mechanized and airborne attacks, and it's clearly planned to do. Russian forces have temporarily abandoned failed efforts to seize Cherniv. So there's a scenario there, the situation in Cherniv. But also what we've already sort of demonstrated is that, in this northern front, we've got no, this isn't the one with Cherniv, is it? The Belarius one. Got Cherniv there, and so they bypassed it. So we can. What I'm sort of doing is I'm looking at things like that, and then sort of saying, well, have we got the Cherniv situation covered? Well, it's not a unique and specific scenario, but yeah, we've got that sort of general thing covered. We've got the Cherniv situation, and we can put that into context with its locality to Kiev there. And just sort of going through, I'm not doing it religiously, but I'm trying to sort of base it to some extent on what these things say. So Russian movements in eastern Ukraine remain primarily focused on pinning the large concentration of Ukrainian conventional forces arranged along the former line of contact in the east. So again, we've sort of got that with this scenario here. And they're really sort of blunt and basic and almost unappealing scenarios, but they are sort of functional. So here we've got that. So they're not trying, they're just pinning them down. And so what's happening here is they're sort of pinning all these forces down and preventing them from going elsewhere, because they're fighting on multiple fronts. So they're just keeping these units there. And I think what they're trying to do to some extent is, they're trying to come from down here, which is the Crimea. And so this is the Maripole situation. So we do actually have that. The road to Maripole, and what you can see down here, obviously there should be really more fortified, but you can see, and I got it a bit wrong that they weren't actually this far up. They weren't in that place, but I think they've got there now. I think they've taken Brodie Assault there, but they're basically going to come up this way and take Maripole, and they're also trying to fight through from here, and so we can start to sort of put all these things together. Russian forces coming north from Crimea halted their drive westward towards Odessa. And the Ukrainian forces have retaken the critical city of Kherson. So we've looked at the Kherson scenario. So we've got that. So what I'm saying is I'm sort of working through some of these and sort of thinking, well, have I got this? Have I got that? I'm building this one now, the Mykolaiv, which is, they've gone through Kherson and gone on to Mykolaiv. But the main axis of advance has shifted to the north and east towards Zaporizhzhia and Maripole. Now we've got Maripole, but I haven't done that. So that might be one of the next ones I'll look at if I feel inclined. I'm certainly not going to sit here and sort of religiously try to sort of do everything, but I have felt a little bit obliged to at least get my head around what's happening with the Nagorno-Karabakh. I can never even say it. That's how much I became familiar with it all. I never really it was always sort of happening too quickly for my mind to really sort of grasp. I just sort of would take little chunks of something I'd read somewhere and make a scenario out of it. And but I mean, this is to some extent this is what I do. In blogging these war things, and it's all sort of a bit inconvenient for me, really, which is probably not really the most diplomatic thing to describe this war as, because I'm sort of on holiday. So I'm sitting at the beach, in the 30 degrees sun, swimming in the sea. I'm totally oblivious, I think, to anything. I was actually there yesterday, and I still went to the beach. I didn't go to the beach today, but I've looked. If you were to look through Twitter, which I'm doing, you would imagine that I was Satan personified, having an interest in the war. But I've sort of been doing this for so long. It's very sort of, I suppose I'm quite content and happy with the situation, because I was reading somewhere in one of the Twitter things, and it was a picture of Mr. Bean. It was one of these meme things. I really don't like memes, but it was, here's a war gamer waiting for the Ukraine war so they can make a game about it. Well, I mean, I've been doing this whole thing now. Well, obviously I've been doing, I don't even know how long I've been doing this, but it's since a good sort of like 6 years. But the war in Donbass. So we've been doing, I've got these sort of situations: 2018, 2017, 16. I didn't even finish that. Going back to 2015, I can always remember this one. And I still don't really know where to place them all. And I never really focused on the Ukraine situation, because it was so static and so boring. It was a bit like the Kashmir conflict. I mean, there's always someone firing some artillery at someone, and there's only so much of that you can sort of do. And to sort of say, well, there's been sort of waiting and planning for all of this. I think what will happen, just like the Nagorno-Karabakh thing down here, it will come and go, and it will then be just history. And then you've got to sort of look back and sort of think, okay, well, I can remember this one actually. And well, that's it. I mean, that's basically the sort of the snapshot that I took of that situation, as it was happening. And that's that. So it's, I think when you realise that these are sort of rather rudimentary snapshots of history in the making, I think I feel quite comfortable in my sort of perspective and standing on it, because it's not sort of, oh gosh, I'll do this and then everyone will think I'm clever or important. I'm reading, I was looking at some of these other tweets, and I'm not going to look at the tweets now because I don't want to, but you can see the things, sort of like the likes and the retweets actually going up in real time, and obviously nothing I tweet ever actually gets anything, which is a bit frustrating, but at the same time, it's sort of, as long as I don't attract too much attention globally, I'm okay, really. It's not sort of, that's not my intent. I mean, I think my intent will be to sort of say, well, when it's over, I have all these, records of account of what's happened, for good or worse. In the same sense that, I've got a lot of these, and it's, going back to say the Afghan Civil War for this date, I mean, 2 items, because it's not actually that easy to get that sort of information. But if you look at the war in Afghanistan, which is now sort of over, and don't hear anything about that war in Afghanistan, because it was sort of happening and these things were being caught. I mean, there's all these different sort of situations. Let's see when it comes up. obviously there's loads. I mean, there's nearly 50 pilots. There's going to be 40, up to 50 scenarios for that. And this Kandahar Road has always been a favourite of mine. I really like the way that one sort of worked, because it was just sort of like the hearts and minds, and it sort of seemed like quite a fairly balanced scenario. I like the map, and then peace broke out, and that's the end of it all. And you suddenly left with this sort of realization that there is no time like the present, and you're not really going to get the chance to sort of sit back and find a good book that shows you exactly what happened. There's still no books like that, that show you on a sort of a moment by moment sort of account of things. And so, to some extent, what I'm trying to say is, any efforts that I put into this, I'm not, they're going to pan out in the long term. In the short term, where you sort of do something that happened today and put it on Twitter and run the risk of being called a ghoul or something like that, it doesn't really concern me that much. It's always in the back of my mind. You sort of think, well, a lot of these people on Twitter, what are their intentions? And I think a lot of people are sort of obviously looking for whatever that special thing is when you get attention. I wouldn't want to put it down to being as simplistic as endorphins and all of that stuff, but I think everyone's sort of hunting for the same thing, and all the people that hunt that out under the disguise of, it's we stand in solidarity with the women of the Ukraine. I find this sort of slightly hypocritical, and I'm not sure where they're coming from really, because I don't think there's I just don't see them being as sincere as they sound, when they sort of rack up, tens of thousands of likes and et cetera, et cetera. And I think, there's a lot of sort of people who are just sitting out there and they just want as much, click juice as they can, and things like this are just sort of their ways of doing it. So that's all sort of a bit of the background on sort of on that side. I don't think it's worth sort of dwelling too much more on that, but I do intend to sort of put a bit of effort into at least putting myself in a position where I understand what's happening, and I'm sort of a little bit more ahead of the curve. And I'm doing that by looking at the general headlines in the news sites, the BBC. A lot of these sites are now paywall. You click on them and you think, okay, well, they're going to have a nice story here. Some of them have good maps. The Institute of Study War seems to be a good resource. Obviously, Twitter, Southfront. So as long as I can keep on top of, to some extent, what's happening, I think that would be my intention. I might at some point get a little more focused on putting in deployed units. Let's just have a quick look at this one, because I'm pretty sure that I know what's on here. So basically they've got this, and this is about as near as I've seen to any sort of deployment. So they've got this unit, that's obviously an infantry unit with a question mark, the Belarius. So that looks like something that might happen. You've got this armoured unit, question mark. I'm not sure where that one is. But basically, I think at some point it's going to become, this is not so much the missing link, but what's happening where, and how are these things being fought. It seems to me that, we don't know what sort of forces are on either side. There's no real way at this stage to say that this is the 57th Division or the 20th Army or the 15th Brigade or the 6th Company or the 15th Brigade. I mean, even in the Syrian Civil War, we never really got that sort of degree of information, but quite often you do. And I think to some extent, as I can sort of slowly grasp how I feel it's going, I might start sort of adding more units, in particular giving the Ukrainians more appropriate defensive sort of orders of battle, so to speak. For example, I think in Kiev, it's quite clear that they are actually manning small defensive units now. I'm wondering, well, what should I call those? Should I call those irregulars? Because they're not really sort of irregulars in the sense that they're as sort of proactive as, say, as irregulars that I might use in the Syrian, Iraqi scenarios, or even Afghanistan, Libya, and all these other places, because those are sort of fanatical irregulars that are sort of, highly focused and highly organised. But I don't want to call them rioters either, because I think they're a little more structured and organised than rioters. And so what I'm thinking, to some extent, I'm not going to look for it, but there's a big battle in the Yugoslav wars or something. Let's see if I can find it. Where the Russians got bogged down completely with the anti-tank units. Is it the Georgian War? No, it wasn't this one. No. See, I can never remember any of these things. But basically, the Russians just got completely bogged down in the cities with these sort of anti-tank units. The thing is, they couldn't actually organise themselves to actually present a complete front or in an offensive capability. But what they were doing, they were really good at taking out a lot of the armour, and that was basically a real problem for the Russians. And it seems that they're going to get in that sort of situation because maybe it's this one, because the anti-tank missiles have just come along so much so that I thought it was yet a war. No. So I can never remember where these things are. I'll remember it after I've done the video. But the point is that they're going to get bogged down with that. And so the question is, what do I call these people? So in Kiev, for example, do I give them I probably just will do that. Just give them irregular units, because to some extent they're pretty much the same. But they're probably not going to be as good at offensive actions. They're probably not going to engage in any sort of offensive, full front line coordinated offensive actions. So what they're probably could be quite good at is holding their ground within a sector, supporting each other, and going out and doing sort of little raids, spotting armored vehicles, hunting them out and destroying them. But they're probably not going to be very good at driving units away. They're probably not going to be very good at, say, moving out of Kiev and carrying out offensive actions against, small towns and villages where the Russians, are present. So, I could call it, the thing is, I don't want to call them rioters because that's not what they are, but they should be at that sort of level. So I'm still trying to think about how to deploy units. I think there's going to be a hell of a lot, because if I was the Ukrainians, I would have been stocking up on anti-tank weapons. And I saw my first video of the little red dots that fly around that we saw so much of in the Syrian civil war. Those little red dots. They're just, you just get a couple of guys with these little anti-tank weapons firing at sort of 1 or 2 mile range, taking out, almost anything, cars, pebble, rock made sort of defensive features. If Russia decides to sort of try and hold something like Kiev, they're going to lose a hell of a lot of manpower and hardware. But the thing is, all I'm sort of trying to say is, I'm not sure exactly how to sort of start building up things so that they sort of make a little sense. So, for example, in the battle for Kiev, this scenario here, then what do I want to do? Just sort of like plonk hundreds of 113 units, just absolutely stuff it, just like I did in some of the Mosul ones and the I can't remember that sort of massive Syrian civil war. What was it called? I can never remember anything. It's a good job I'm sort of fairly organised. I can find it, but I can never remember where it is. I think it's Desort. What is it? No, it was well after that. Well, before that. So it's the one with the big citadel in the middle. Aleppo. There, this one. Look at that. And what I'm saying is I could build up the battle for Kiev like this, with this many units, this sort of complexity and this stupidity of detail. But before I get there, because this is actually quite well thought out, this isn't random. These are all particular units. So that's the Bath Brigade, second. We can see that they've grouped down there, and there's some down there. But then we've got over here the sort of Levant Front Infantry, some more over there, and the Authenticity and Development Front Infantry, the Harak Hezbollah and Nujaba Infantry. This isn't quite what it seems, but it's always, I think it takes the prize for being the most stupidly intense game or scenario that there is. So when it comes down to just plonking things together for the battle for Kiev, it's not beyond me to just fill it with units, but how and why and what balance, because it's a different sort of situation, and because I only just realised this was happening less than 2 days ago. I feel as though I've by putting this together I can sort of start thinking, well, what units do I need to sort of reflect what is happening, because no one even really knows what's happening. We're seeing a few pictures of gunfire. Do I want to sort of one of the things I think I will be putting on next, I put the grad systems in. I've got a lot of these counters, but I want to start sort of developing a sort of a palette of units that are going to be sort of, well, this is what I'm going to use in this scenario. And off-table missiles, I've got off-table artillery, but I think I'm going to basically have a whole range of off-table missiles, and these will represent, long-range ballistic missiles. I can't remember what ones they are, but things that are fired long distance, one way or another, from a ship, a submarine, from an aircraft, from a land-based system, 50 or 100 miles away. I think I'm going to be putting a lot of that, because I think that might be happening. I think what we might be seeing to some extent is a lot of remote war, and I think this is one of the things that we haven't seen so far that we should be seeing, a lot of the drone activity. But I think a lot of what we're seeing in the Gaza Strip, with the Israelis doing their double tap, and I think what's going to happen is we're going to see, because they're trying to say, they're striking civilian buildings, but we all know that they're actually holding up in those tower blocks, just like in Yugoslavia, I think, and other sort of situations. I mean, if there's a high-rise tower block, they're going to be sitting in there with snipers at the very least, and that's going to be a problem for the Russians. And so what I think they're going to, and they don't want to be just blowing up civilian targets, so they're going to start, I think probably what you'll find is that the way they're going to approach Kiev, they're going to say, listen, you got to surrender. Anything that's giving us a problem is just going to be flattened with a caliber ballistic missile, and we're going to put a double tap system in. You're going to get a little tap on the roof, and then half an hour later the building will vanish. And I think that will bring a lot of the resistance down because they don't want to see their city destroyed. I think that there's a lot of sort of bravado, and but I think at some point they're going to have to realise that a long drawn out war is going to destroy their infrastructure and all of their cities. I don't think that anyone truly believes that Putin wants to rule Ukraine. And so they're going to sort of come to a conclusion and say, okay, well, we both had a good go at this. Let's just come to an agreement. And I think that that's what will happen because, as I think I've intonated before, and I don't really have the qualifications to make a prediction based on the fact that I was so certain it wouldn't happen. But I think that what Putin wants to do is to just totally destroy as much of the very expensive military hardware and infrastructure as he can. And then once he's done, he'll say, "Oops, sorry, we'll end it there," because it's going to take them centuries, well not centuries, it's going to take them decades to reinvest in what they've lost. And that is his objective, or that's his stated objective. I don't believe he really cares too much about regime change because it doesn't matter whether or not the current president's still leading the country. If they spend the next 5 years preoccupied with rebuilding basic public utilities, electricity, housing, because every day this goes on, bridges are going to be destroyed. It's shocking really to sort of consider the scale of destruction that this brings to a Western state. And I've always said this with regards to the Syrian and the Middle East operations. People are sort of are less sort of not so much concerned because it's the Middle East, but their housing density is quite low. They build things quite quickly again without sort of too much housing regulation, building regulation, etc., etc. But I've always said that if you get anything serious in a Western nation, as soon as their refrigerators go, there's going to be chaos. If you just look at all these tower blocks, none of them have a back garden to sort of quickly grow some potatoes and some tomatoes. None of them are going to be able to sort of get some goats and some chickens and sort of start feeding themselves. Which I'm not saying everyone in Syria can, but it's more agricultural, sort of pastoral type place, and the better place to sort of recover. But once these cities start to lose power and electricity, their toilets stop flushing, where are they all going to go? Which is something that obviously we've had a bit about the refugees, and it seems odd to me that because if you consider the size of the Ukraine, that all these refugees feel inclined to leave the country. I mean, there's plenty of places that they can go where they're not going to get blown up. I don't know where they are, but if you consider it's 2.5 times the size of England, the UK, Scotland is basically a wilderness. Much of Wales is a wilderness. You can go and find some remote valleys and hills where the United Nations can set up sort of emergency tents, and I'm sure the Russians would not drive through in the middle of the night with 50 cows on the back of open Toyota trucks, killing everyone. It's not Africa. So I think that although it'd be cold and miserable and people would be complaining because they can't tweet and all sorts of things like that, I don't think that there's necessarily this sort of urgency for people to leave the country. I think that's a political point-winning thing that Poland's welcoming all the refugees. Well, whether they do or not is not something that I'm really commenting on. It's just there would be plenty of scope for people to move. In the Second World War, people moved from London to the country. They called the evacuees, mainly children, and they'd go and live with old women and old people in their cottages and had a fantastic time, safe from the bombs and the bombing. And I'm pretty sure that the Ukraine could probably, suffice. I'm not saying that it's going to be easy or fun or nice or anything, but the point I'm trying to get to and make really is that, this is a first world, semi-first world. It still has a very sort of deep sense of the communist sort of mass blocks of flats type living arrangements, which I find quite scary, really. But every one of those, they've got like, I don't know, 1,000 people living in them, and all you need is the sewage to stop working, the electrics to stop working, and all of a sudden they're going to have to sort of, go, and there will be chaos. And so no one wants too much destruction, because it's not like Aleppo. I mean, Aleppo was mostly razed to the ground, and they were still sort of managing to live without too much hardship. I mean, I think there were lots of problems with refugees and women and children, and but there were lots of people still actually making a go of it in the ruins of Aleppo. And it really did get to that stage where the whole place was just completely demolished in many areas, especially when the Russians came in. And if this carries on, Kiev will end up like that. And I don't think that they're going to spend a lot of time going from building to building, doing it properly. They're just going to blow buildings up. And I think that we're going to end up with a situation where neither side really wants that, and there'll be some sort of peace arranged, and I think it's going to be conditional on a very sort of demilitarized Ukraine, one way or the other. And I mean, I think the Russians, from one point, have the cards in their hand on that, because they can just sit there blowing things up. Of course, the real concern to some extent is what other countries do, in the meantime, because it could be very serious. I mean, I can't really imagine what other countries can do, but bit by bit, for example, what happened? I mean, Turkey apparently have said you can't come through the Baltic, whatever. They're not going to let the Baltic fleet in and out of the Bosphorus. And so, what is Russia going to, go to war with Turkey, which is a NATO state? What's going to happen here and what's going to happen there? I mean, are the British going to send in their Apache helicopter? They've got helicopters, attack helicopters. I don't know what they are. They've moved them into Latvia, I think. Military advisors. A slow slide into global warfare, with the Chinese, having a distinctive sort of trump card in that game. But I mean, they could move into Taiwan. Israel could take this opportunity to make serious strikes against Iran, and Iran can then start to whatever. There's lots of big global players that, once this has hit the fan, we can't really predict what will happen. So well, that's it really. But I think that I don't know. I'm going to follow it. I'm going to sort of map as much as possible, and build up a sort of a palette of units to sort of reflect and model, and get a greater sense for what's happening. But this is the second day or the third day of the actual of the actual conflict, and so it's still sort of a bit early really to sort of say exactly what's what or anything. So I'm just sort of testing the water really. But that's that really. So I'll leave it at that, and I'm not sure whether this will even record. 54 minutes. It's good timing really, because it never let me do more than an hour. But yeah, so I will be sort of putting them together so that you can play them as games, or run them as simulations, or use them as maps to get an idea of what's happening. So stay tuned for sort of more. Yeah, and I'll speak to you later. Cheerio.